we're looking at one of the most recognizable images in the history of art. Hokusai's The Great Wave off Kanagawa. At first glance, this appears to be a simple, beautiful image of the sea. A perfect wave, frozen in time. But look closer. That beautiful wave is about to crash down on 3 boats filled with terrified fishermen. And in the distance, small and seemingly insignificant, sits Mount Fuji, the sacred heart of Japan, receding into the background as this wall of water threatens to engulf everything in its path. This isn't just a picture of a wave. Some art historians believe this is an image of a nation facing uncertainty. Japan, which had isolated itself from the world for over 2 centuries, watching as that very isolation, symbolized by the protective sea, becomes a source of danger. The wave curves like a claw. The spray becomes snow. And somewhere between beauty and terror, Hokusai captures a moment that still resonates nearly 200 years later. This print was created around 1830, during what's known as the Edo period. In 1639, Japan had closed its borders to the outside world. Foreigners were expelled. Christianity was banned. Leaving or entering Japan became punishable by death. For over 200 years, Japan remained sealed off, developing a culture entirely its own. And from this isolation came something extraordinary, a uniquely Japanese art form that belonged to the people, not just the elite. During the Edo period, strict social order governed every aspect of life. At the top sat the emperor, court nobles, and the shogun, feudal military leaders who controlled Japan. Below them were samurai warriors, then farming peasants, then artisans, and at the bottom, merchants. But by the mid-18th century, Edo, now called Tokyo, had become the largest city in the world with a population of 1 million. And as the economy boomed, the merchant class began accumulating wealth. They couldn't change their social status, but they could afford luxuries, education, travel within Japan, books, and art. These merchants developed a culture centered on pleasure and entertainment. They called it ukiyo-e, the floating world. This culture flourished in the entertainment districts of Edo, where you'd find kabuki theaters, brothels, poets, and writers. And from this culture emerged ukiyo-e, pictures of the floating world. These were woodblock prints, mass-produced and sold by the thousands. They depicted kabuki actors, famous courtesans, scenes from daily life. Like today, sex and fame sold. These prints could be bought for the price of a bowl of noodles, affordable, accessible, wildly popular. But they were also considered low art, carrying little social prestige compared to traditional painting. Yet they changed everything. For the first time in Japanese history, ordinary people could own art, collect it, enjoy it in their homes. Ukiyo-e democratized visual culture. Katsushika Hokusai was born in 1760. As a teenager, he made his reputation painting portraits of kabuki actors for woodblock prints. But later in his career, he shifted toward landscapes and scenes of ordinary Japanese life. This was revolutionary. Landscape had never been the primary subject of ukiyo-e, but Hokusai saw something worth exploring: the relationship between people and place. His personal life was marked by tragedy. Both his wives died. 2 of his children predeceased him. At 50, he was struck by lightning. Later, he suffered a stroke and had to relearn how to draw. In Japan, reaching 60 is considered a time of rebirth. And Hokusai's final decades were indeed his most productive. As he himself said, "All I have done before the age of 70 is not worth bothering with." At 70 years old, he embarked on his most ambitious project, 36 views of Mount Fuji. Mount Fuji was sacred in Japan, with over 800 shrines dedicated to it. For Hokusai, it was a personal spiritual obsession, and in Japanese culture, it symbolized strength, stability, and the soul of the nation. In the series, Hokusai shows Mount Fuji from forests, villages, lakes, rivers, and beaches. Each view offers a different perspective, but it was one view in particular, the sea view, known as the Great Wave off Kanagawa, that would create international fascination with Japanese art. Hokusai became the first ukiyo-e artist to use landscape as the main focus of mass-produced prints. His approach was distinctive, condensing images to their purest form, emphasizing line and color, placing ordinary working people within sacred landscapes. Landscape prints weren't initially as popular as celebrity images, but as travel within Japan increased, so did demand for souvenirs. Woodblock prints showing famous places became collectible for travelers heading to Mount Fuji. Then, in 1829, something changed the visual possibilities of ukiyo-e entirely. Prussian blue, a synthetic pigment that had previously been extremely expensive, suddenly became available at a low price through trade with China. Hokusai's publisher immediately commissioned 36 views to exploit this vibrant new color. The first 5 prints in the series were printed almost entirely in shades of Prussian blue. Even the outlines, usually black, were printed in blue. These prints were marketed as ukiyo-e, blue-printed pictures. Prussian blue was more vivid, had greater tonal range, and didn't fade. By using different saturations, Hokusai creates the impression of dawn or dusk, when our eyes can't distinguish distinct colors in soft light. Now, here's something interesting about Hokusai's technique. Although Japan's borders were officially closed, the Dutch were permitted limited trade, just 2 ships per year. Through this narrow opening, Hokusai encountered Dutch landscape prints. They influenced his work profoundly. Western artists fix the viewer's perspective. There's a clear position from which we observe the scene. Japanese landscape painting traditionally presents a more panoramic, floating view. Time in Western art is fixed. In Japanese art, it's fluid. Interestingly, while traditional Japanese painting avoided European perspective, lowbrow prints like ukiyo-e sometimes used it as a novelty, marketed as uki-e, perspective pictures. Hokusai synthesized everything he'd learned over 6 decades into 36 views. And ironically, the print Westerners consider quintessentially Japanese is actually a hybrid of Japanese and European ideas. The Great Wave measures 25 by 37 centimeters. Hokusai uses a low horizon line, typical of Dutch landscapes, which creates dynamic movement. The wave occupies 2/3 of the composition. The dark silhouette of Mount Fuji and the bright snow on its peak suggest early morning. The location is off Kanagawa, south of Edo. Tossed in the waves are 3 fast boats used to transport live fish to Tokyo markets. And here's where Hokusai's mastery reaches its conclusion. Mount Fuji, the highest point in Japan, is dwarfed by this enormous wave in the foreground. The spray from the wave mirrors the snow on Fuji's peak. As the wave breaks, that same spray creates ominous, claw-like fingers reaching toward the boats. It's the distance of Mount Fuji that creates dread. We're uncertain whether the fishermen will reach shore. Some art historians interpret this as more than a seascape. In the waning days of Tokugawa rule, fear of foreign invasion was real. One theory suggests that Hokusai's turbulent sea reflects an uncertain Japan, struggling like the fishermen, while Mount Fuji, solid, unmoving, represents the nation's soul. The sea, which protected Japan for centuries, now carries foreign threats. Creating a woodblock print required a team: publisher, artist, block carver, and printer. The publisher commissioned a design. Hokusai created it on thin paper, which was glued face down onto a woodblock. The carver peeled away the paper, leaving only ink lines on the wood surface. The original drawing was destroyed in this process. The carver then reproduced Hokusai's brushstrokes in wood, an extraordinary feat. The blocks were carved from hard cherry wood to withstand thousands of hand printings. For each color, a separate block was carved. This means every print has unique qualities. Slight variations in pressure, ink saturation, paper texture. Behind the apparent simplicity is a complicated, collaborative process. Hokusai believed Mount Fuji was a talisman of longevity. He was convinced he'd live to 110. He lived to 89. Extraordinary for his time. He never stopped experimenting, painting until his final day. Unfortunately, he died penniless, having used his savings to pay his grandson's gambling debts. In 1853, American ships forced Japan to open trade with the West. Japan's isolation ended, and when Japanese art finally reached Europe and America, it astonished everyone. Bold designs, intense colors, simple lines, these influenced an entire generation of Western artists and helped precipitate modern art. Van Gogh, Monet, and Degas all collected ukiyo-e prints. The Great Wave became one of the most reproduced images in art history. But when you encounter the actual print in a museum, you see the texture of the paper, the subtle variations in blue, the precision of the carving. You see a moment frozen between beauty and terror, a nation caught between tradition and change. And in the distance, steady and unmoved, Mount Fuji watches it all.